FRC teams, welcome to the first Fundraising Toolkit, Section 2 webinar, which is focused on the topic of community analysis. My name is Ray Becker, and I'm the first Fundraising Toolkit coordinator. And joining me today are FRC teams 1018, 1625, and 2470. The Fundraising Toolkit was created through a grant from the Argosy Foundation with a focus to provide teams the materials they need to go out to their local communities and fundraise money in their local areas. The idea behind the toolkit was to help teams develop local relationships where they could engage with companies, tell the companies more about the FIRST robotics program, and increase the sustainability of teams in their local areas. The project also is meant to highlight successful fundraising methods that other teams have done in other areas so that teams could look at these methods and take them back to their local area and adapt them for something that suits their needs. The goal of the second section of the fundraising toolkit is to identify new team partnerships that teams would be able to engage in, get an understanding of the local businesses in your area, and also the way kind of things work essentially in the business world around your school or the location of your team, and also build a community network so that you're making FIRST loud in your local communities. So in this section, we have the webinars today that we're doing with 1018, 1625, and 2470. And we also have a description of the section and a database of partnerships template that we've put together so that teams are able to identify local businesses that they would want to approach, and they're able to clearly mark down the information about those companies in a database so that they can track who's contacting what company when, and go from there. So section 2 focuses on how the three teams that we have here today worked through the process of doing this community analysis and making their own database of partnerships or sponsored database for them to utilize on their team. So let's introduce the teams and the representatives. We have Mary from Pike RoboDevils. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your team?
Absolutely. We are an urban team from Indianapolis, and we have been part of FIRST this is our 11th season. We have about 30 students and about 5 full-time mentors.
And we also have team 1625, Innovation.
Hi, we're First Team 1625 Winnovation. We are a rural team from Winnebago, Illinois. We are entering our 10th season with FIRST, and we have about 35 students on our team and about 7 mentors.
Great. And then finally, Blitz team, Evan.
All right, yep. We are Team 2470, the Blitz team from Bloomington, Minnesota. We're in a suburban area. We have around 25 people on our team total. 23 of those are students, and 2 of them are mentors.
All right, sounds great. So going through this community analysis, how did teams identify local organizations that they wanted to connect with? Mary, do you want to talk about how 1018 approached the community analysis first?
Absolutely. Well, we just started off by doing a simple Google search. We typed in our zip code and local engineering and technology companies, and we had over 50 hits just looking at that because there are a ton of engineering companies in Indianapolis. And we had the students actually do the searching part, and they're, of course, very familiar with Google. So it worked very well for both the students and the mentors.
Absolutely. And one of the really nice things that you can do with a Google search is you can look up your school or the location of where your team is located, and you can click on search nearby, and you can actually look up specific, specific things, so such as engineering, restaurants, apparel, things like that, that are closest to where the team is actually located. And so that is one amazing useful part of being able to do a community analysis, is being able to really see what's in your area based on what you're searching for. So I highly suggest that teams utilize that aspect of the Google search, that search nearby function. All right, and Kayla, talk about what 1625 did to identify local organizations that you wanted to approach.
We also did online research to look up local communities, but a very valuable asset for us is our team has a lot of family involvement. So we had a meeting where every team member, their parents, our mentors, everyone took some time to come up with connections that they had or just local businesses they thought that would be good to go to for our team. So we all compiled a giant list of potentials. And then we also discovered a lot of small manufacturing companies in our area by just exploring and driving around Rockford, which is a city very close to our small town. And we found manufacturing companies that didn't have websites that you couldn't find online, and like machine shops, things of that nature.
Absolutely, that sounds very useful. I know that other teams have done that in the past, where they've just driven around their area and looked at who's been nearby. Since starting this fundraising toolkit, I've actually been on the highway and I've been driving past these industrial parks where all these businesses are located, and I look at them and I'm like, oh, that could be a potential team sponsor. So I try to remember that for later. It's kind of been very amusing. So Evan, can you talk about what your team did to identify local organizations?
Yeah, I certainly can. We looked at the local area Chamber of Commerce, and with the Chamber of Commerce, you have a lot of local companies that are members in there, and we were able to work with them to find contacts and names of the local companies and people who we could contact with them to just get that initial your foot in the door type step thing. Additionally, we checked out our city's Wikipedia article, and we were able to identify, I believe it's the top 10 employers of our area. And from there, we were able to, identify some of those large companies we should be going for.
Great. And now, Evan, do you also want to talk about what did you find after you did your community analysis? What are some of these key sponsors or surprise companies that you found in your area?
Well, we found that there are actually quite a bit of large companies in our area. There's corporate companies, in fact. In addition to that, we also found a company on the other side of the city from where our high school is located that actually donates items into the Kid Apart each and every year. So we thought that they might be a good company to contact and see if they potentially become sponsors of our team, or even a partnership with them would be great.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great lead into a potential company that would maybe sponsor the team. Mary, what did your team find by doing this community analysis?
Well, we found that there's so many companies right around Pike High School, and we had no idea that they were even there. We have an industrial park that's right across the street, and I always thought that a lot of businesses were housed there, but I didn't realize how many of them were engineering and technology firms. So we really kind of opened our eyes to what kind of companies are around us and what kind of companies we can potentially go to for sponsorship.
Absolutely, Mary, and you're based in a very urban area, and Evan, you're from a suburban area. And so, Kayla, can you talk about some of the challenges and what you found in your community analysis, being from a rural town?
We found that there are little to no STEM related businesses in our area. The majority of our local businesses are small restaurants, small family owned things that we already have partnerships. That being said, there aren't many large corporate sponsorships or engineering technology companies that we can go to. So in that, we've adapted to having to branch out to other communities. We are luckily very close to Rockford, which is a city that has many more engineering companies and manufacturing companies that we can look to for sponsorship. However, in our immediate area, there are very slim pickings, so we've had to adapt in order to sustain our team.
Absolutely, and that's a good something that's good to note that these differences that the teams are facing based on their local areas, and so I want to highlight for with Pike and with 2470. So, what are some of these new companies that the team wants to reach out to? Just the type of company. So, Evan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, we've actually tried reaching out to law firms in our area, machine shops, corporate gas stations, and engineering firms. We would try to be as wide-reaching as possible. Look at every single possible place we could go to and present about STEM education and FIRST, and to just kind of get the word out there about our team, even if it's not maybe something that they would sponsor normally. It's why not? Our goal is to get the word out there about first, and if something good, even more good, can come out of that, that's great.
All right. So Mary, what did any students identify, new companies, new industries in your area that they wanted to get involved with?
Absolutely. We first, of course, noticed the engineering and technology companies that are around us in Indianapolis, but we also really looked to our fundraising plan to see what our needs were. When I told the kids, of course, we need T-shirts every year, they thought, well, why don't we look for graphic design companies? And so that I thought that was a really great idea. We took a look at our needs and did our search based on that. What kind of in-kind donations would those companies offer to us? So we kind of tailored it because there were so many. We wanted to tailor the companies, our outreach effort to the companies that we thought it would be beneficial for both of us.
Absolutely, and that is exactly why we started with having the teams go through this fundraising plan so that they could discover their needs and really key into some of these keywords or even just key businesses that they would want to approach. So Kayla, you did mention, in Winnebago, there's not many businesses there, so you moved into Rockford to kind of look at some of these different manufacturing companies. Did you notice any interesting industries or specific types of companies that were in the Rockford area that you didn't weren't aware of?
Yeah, there are definitely. We, in our exploring the city, one day we went down a street and we found just a cluster of small manufacturing businesses that we would have had no idea about if we hadn't have taken that turn one day. So, like I said, exploring is good, but finding companies like that, as well as going to those companies that at first don't seem like robotics would be their thing. Like if you go to a non-STEM related company, but if you talk to them about the benefits of the program and show them that there's more to it than that, a lot of companies get really interested in just like the business skills that FIRST provides, and all of the different aspects to it really can spark interest in companies that don't right away go for a STEM related thing. So making sure that you have a wide variety of benefits to provide to them, as well as a bunch of telling them a bunch of positives about the program and like the educational benefits and all the networking and everything is another really great way to get people interested, and new companies that wouldn't look at it at first suddenly really interested in what you're doing.
Absolutely. I know of teams that have gone to things like funeral parlors and they've actually sponsored the team with a small amount of money. So, not just staying with these engineering companies and really branching out into those different areas that the teams identified they'd like to get into, or even areas that the teams would be surprised about, is an absolutely fantastic idea. All right, and so doing this community analysis, it is incredibly important to really stretch your network and flex those networking muscles with the teams. And so one of the ways to do that is to really work with the parents, mentors, and students to identify who they can talk with. So, Mary, can you talk about how 1018 was able to work through that?
What's that?
Sorry. Could you talk about how you were able to really engage the mentors and students into this community analysis process and identify people that they could reach out to for their networking?
Absolutely. Um, well, I guess to start, we had to really think about it as a mentor team. I took it to the mentors and I said, we obviously need to raise more money. And so that really got the mentors invested in this plan. The students were easy to get their interest as well, because we talked about what would life be like if you didn't have to pay travel fees to be on the team. And so that really sparked their interest. They were really invested because they wanted to raise money so that they potentially wouldn't have to pay a travel fee in upcoming years. And we plan on taking it to the parents next month and using the same kind of bait that we did with the students. What would life be like if you didn't have to pay a travel fee for your students? Um, and hopefully that will, encourage the parents to become just as invested as the mentors and students are.
And I think that that's a great approach to go through, is really to have that parent meeting and to see, what do the parents think? What kind of resources could you tap into through them? So, Kayla, why don't you talk a little bit about the team brainstorming meeting that Winnovation held?
Well, we're very fortunate to have a very family-oriented team. Usually, if one student is involved, their whole family comes to every event and cheers on. We have a lot of families have students go through the program. So there are a lot of parents that have been involved with our program for a long time and see the importance to these things, as well as our mentors and our students, because this year this is the last year one of our biggest sponsors will be able to sponsor us, so that kind of increases the necessity to come up with more sponsors and to have a better fundraising plan. So what we did and what we usually do every season is we have a meeting with all of our parents, all of our mentors, all of our students, anyone who wants to come, and we hand out like a scrap piece of paper and have everyone list companies that they can think of that maybe they know someone through, or just a company that sounds good, like something that they would be interested in robotics, or something that sponsors a lot of local business in the community. And we kind of compile that list and we take it, and then we start talking to the students and having them work with the companies that they provided. For example, if I provide a company, I would give it to my mentors. They would say, okay, well, contact them. And then we have students on our marketing team as well as mentor review letters they send the company, teach students how to make phone calls, as well as make sure that like the students are able to go out there and get all of those potential sponsors. And it's a great way to come up with a bunch of names. And it's really fortunate because sometimes you have a family member that knows someone. We have a sponsor that is a company in Kentucky because a student has a family member who works down there who was interested in the program. So it's amazing how far you can branch out just by going through the parents and the mentors, because getting your parents involved is very important, and you can find a lot of really great connections through that.
Absolutely, and that's a great example of ways that the team was able to really, get their network moving and make things work. And I'm sure it did take time for the team to develop those resources once you started focusing on them. And so, teams shouldn't be discouraged if they're working on this the first year and they don't necessarily see how their network is expanding. But as time goes on and as their program grows, you'll really be able to see how you are engaging the local community. So, all right, Evan, can you talk about what your team dynamic was and how you engaged these parties in this community analysis?
I certainly can. So first off, the mentors did pretty much most of the analysis. We compiled all the information that we could find online or in person. And we put it into one spreadsheet and we handed it over to the students. And we're like, all right, guys, we have all this completed for you. This is what we're giving you to work with. It's up to you if you want to move on with this. We'd really like you to do something like this. And what they ended up doing was, of course, the students started reaching out to those companies via phone call first. And eventually they switched over to actually meeting with them in person. So really, in the end, it was the mentors and the students who did the majority of the work for the community analysis on 2470.
Do you have any ideas on ways to engage with some of the parents and ways that they would be able to get involved with the team?
Well, they could certainly help out a lot more with the whole community analysis part. Being there and supporting their students would be something big in the first part. It's something that 2470 has always struggled with. We've always had trouble getting the parents involved, so I don't know the perfect answer for that, unfortunately.
Not a problem. It's good to know that, if you can't necessarily work with your students, to try and talk to the people that they may know in their community or their families or things like that, that you can go to mentors, and the mentors are able to work through this process and engage the students as well, even with that missing link. All right. And then in terms, Evan, you mentioned that you had a database where you organized the potential sponsor information. Can you tell me a little bit about what you had and also what you thought of the template that is going to be available to teams with this toolkit?
Yeah, so we originally started out with a Google document, a spreadsheet actually, where we input all our information. It basically had everything from the company name, the company address, the city, the yearly budget of that company, and then we included, of course, a phone number for the company. We tried to get somebody who was, a real live person, not just a general line. But if not, we got the general line, we got their email address, and then we found a contact name, and we put all this in a spreadsheet, and we used it, and we used that to kind of identify what's going on with these companies and how we contact them. After we did that, we found out the actual resource that Renee created for in Google Docs for identifying sponsors and putting them into a spreadsheet, and that would have been a huge help to us if we would have found that first. I would certainly suggest all teams check that out because it's a much more efficient way than having to create your own. It's created for you already, and it's a really easy way to identify sponsors in your area.
Absolutely. I do want to note that teams are able to take and delete or use whatever they would need to to make that document work for their team, since it does have a lot of information. The largest amount of information you could probably fit into that database, and so being able to reduce that a little bit to make it more manageable for the team is certainly something that they could do. So, Kayla, why don't you talk about what were some of the ways the teams organized your sponsor information?
Our sponsor information before receiving this document was basically just a list of the sponsors and a list of our contact information. And the template that Renee has provided is a million times more detailed and a million times better, and it provides so much more information, which is crucial because we had been having to look up those things about the sponsor every time we went back to them, as opposed to just having it all there. So being able to put all of the information into a database is a much better way of tracking it and making it accessible to your whole team and making sure that you have all the information that you need, as opposed to the vague list that we had before. So it was a wonderful resource to have, and it's great. Everything is just so much more in line and detailed and organized now, so I recommend it 100%.
Thank you. All right, and Mary, I believe that your team actually got the template in its later form, so that it was something that the team was able to implement right away. But what were some things that you noticed the students and how they worked with that template?
Well, the template was very well developed by the time that we got it, and it was very useful. I took it directly to the students and showed them how to use it. And I really liked using a Google Doc because the students were able to live feed update it. They were working on separate computers, but you could see the information as it went in. If they did work at home, it would show up, and so they didn't even need to be in the same room to be working together. They could do the work on their own time, and I assigned them each so many companies, and they kind of took it and ran with it. So I thought it was a great collaborative tool for the whole team to be able to see and make sure that we were all on the same page together.
Absolutely. And when I was there when your team started that database, and one of the things that I noticed was having them in that computer lab and having them all being able to, sit at the document and share it with their emails and have them start working on it and doing the research while everyone was together, made it a lot less of a chore per se, and made it kind of a little bit more fun, more of a challenge to kind of say, which students could find the most sponsors and who's going to get to number 30 before the other people. So
Absolutely.
I enjoyed that.
Enjoyed working on it.
Great. All right, and so let's talk about some of the challenges that these teams found doing this community analysis. And so, Kayla, why don't you talk about how some of the different challenges that you ran into in your more rural area?
In coming up with research, some of the online resources weren't as detailed. Like our Wikipedia page doesn't have an economy section or anything like that, and some of the smaller businesses didn't have very detailed websites or even a website at all. So getting some of that information online was a little more difficult, as well as in branching into these other communities already have robotics teams in their area. So working with the other teams to make sure that we're not oversaturating the area is a very important thing that we're working on right now too.
In order to do that, how have you kept communication lines open with those teams that are already in that city you're working in?
Well, we were fortunate enough to host an event with a lot of the local teams this summer, which made networking with them a lot more open and allowed us to communicate with them better, as well as we've reorganized our team structure a little bit, and we've implemented a new position as like a team liaison, so a person who makes sure to keep contact with the other teams in our area for anything from like budget and things like that to robot playdates to everything like that. So doing that has really strengthened our relationship with the local teams, as well as allowed for us to all work together to help our teams and to make sure that everyone is being provided the best resources possible. And with that, we've been able to go out and branch out into these other towns without worrying about stepping on toes or worrying about taking sponsors from another potential team.
And I think that team liaison position is something that's pretty interesting, because I know for a fact that my alumni team is good friends with 1625. And so they have actually been talking about getting together to do a robot play date within the next couple of weeks. And so I think that team liaison position is doing a really good job so far. So Mary, can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you would run into working with the team on this community analysis?
Absolutely. One of my biggest challenges was teaching the students how to contact companies. When I started, they had their lists, and I told them to call the companies or email the companies that they found online. So we assigned, each student different companies. But when they went to pick up the phone, I realized that a lot of them, the last thing on earth they want to do as awkward teenagers is call somebody they don't know. So I really had to walk them through the steps of how to talk to somebody on the phone, how to talk to somebody you don't know, and how to really ask for money without asking for money directly. So that was something that was challenging for me. I didn't really know how to teach them that at first, but as they made phone calls, they got a lot more comfortable with talking to people on the phone, and they knew what to do, and they started to get the gist of what to do.
And there will be resources available to teams in the continuing sections of the toolkit that include these potential scripts that teams can utilize and adapt to be their own, and also examples from teams who have done this fundraising process before, and some of their fundraising tips and expectations they've implemented on their team to make it easier for how to teach kids these presentation skills, because that's absolutely an important part of fundraising, and we've absolutely identified that as a necessary part of the toolkit, and so that will be coming along shortly. All right, and so Evan, why don't you talk about what challenges you ran into working on your community analysis?
All right. Well, one of the biggest challenges we ran into initially was finding the correct resources to actually start it. We didn't know necessarily that there was a Chamber of Commerce here in Bloomington. We had to figure that sort of stuff out through online searches. And it really took us a while to actually get started and understand that, these are the areas we can go to for support and help when we need to find these other companies in our area. But that was probably the biggest challenge we ran into.
Was there any specific reasons that it was hard to find the Bloomington Chamber of Commerce?
Um, Not necessarily. It's just it wasn't something we were looking for initially. We didn't necessarily know that there was a Chamber of Commerce or what a Chamber of Commerce was. So it was something that we researched, and we actually ended up talking to local community members, and they forwarded us onto the Chamber of Commerce.
Wonderful. That sounds very useful, and that's absolutely a great way for you guys to engage, or for any teams to engage in their local areas. Is working with sponsors you already have to ask them, about what other resources you might be able to tap into. It was something on one of the teams I had worked with in Minnesota. They had actually gone to one of their top tiered sponsors and had presented to them, and the sponsor, heard what we were doing with this toolkit and how we were testing some of these materials out, and they were very interested in working with us to give us references to other companies that the students could potentially approach. And so being able to include that in a way to do a community analysis, networking with your sponsors you already have, and really engaging with, again, that network that these teams are developing is it's incredibly useful and important. So advice to teams about how to create this community analysis and creating the sponsor database. We can absolutely talk about both of those areas because those are very important aspects in terms of searching for the companies and also making sure the data is usable. So Mary, why don't you talk about how what advice you have for these teams and working through this community analysis?
Well, one of my biggest pieces of advice would be to let the students do a lot of the calling. As a mentor, if you try to make 50 phone calls, that's a lot of work for one person or even just a couple of people to do. So have the students be your legs and teach them how to do the community analysis and teach them how to make contact with different companies and how to document it so that they can not only help out with the process, but also really be invested in the process and understand why it's important to reach out to sponsors and raise the money. It gives them a lot more. It makes them feel invested, so they feel like they're helping out with the team, and they really are, doing a huge piece of the work in terms of calling companies and creating the database.
And I think that expectation that the students have to be involved with finding the sponsors and contacting them is an important part of making this a sustainable process, this fundraising process, sustainable. So I think that that's a great piece of advice. Thank you, Mary. So Kayla, do you want to talk about what advice you have for teams in maybe rural areas or teams in general?
I would definitely say expand your searches by exploring local communities, keeping your mind open about which sponsors you go to, not shutting off a company right away because they're not STEM related, and just making sure that you're networking really well because if you look at all of the people involved in your team and all the people involved in local teams, you can really find a lot of companies that you may not have known of before that you already have a foot in because that person is connected to them. So communicate with your team and with local teams and with local businesses, and you find many more potential sponsors.
All right, and Evan, do you have a final piece of advice for teams?
I certainly do. Make sure you are utilizing that toolkit spreadsheet template. Again, it's a huge, huge help in actually documenting the potential sponsors and partnerships that you can make throughout your area.
And I do want to point out that the template that we have for teams, I try to stress the fact that it's a document where you can record partnerships that the team has versus just a sponsor database. Because in some of the teams I've worked with, we've been able to include information about local business owners or even local politicians who are interested in STEM, who have written articles on the topic that we wanted to get in touch with so that they could help promote our program and we could show them what we're doing in our community. And so not only just focusing on businesses and sponsorship and funding, but also focusing on those outreach opportunities and really again the networking portion of those outreach opportunities is incredibly valuable. So, if teams have any questions, they are able to, of course, contact me at rbecker@usfirst.org. But I'd like to thank the teams that were on the call today. I really appreciated the fact that you spent so much time working through this toolkit to test this out, work out any tips and bugs and things like that, and give suggestions to other teams. So, thank you for your time, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
Thanks.